Michael Vasquez. He is a friend of mine from the Southern Tier in the Binghamton region. And Michael is a frequent caller on a lot of shows. He has a podcast. He was featured this year at CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Committee event, which is a big national event where he got to actually have a broadcast live from there. Fun for him. And he's a conservative commentator, former Marine, speaks for the African-American Hispanic community, and he is our next guest. So, Michael, welcome to the show.
Oh, I'm glad to be on the show. It's always good to hear you, and even with your cold right now. And you've had some great guests. I love the kids last week; they were great.
Well, thanks. They're really exceptional.
I think so. I mean, to see that they're the future it's a ray of sunshine in a dark, dark vision of what we see from the Democrats and the progressives and the Democratic Socialists. I'm so happy that there's more coming down the pike.
Yeah, a lot of kids are, this is actually whether it's for or against the excitement of someone like a unusual candidate like Donald Trump has really brought a lot of people out, both pro and con. And I think both Luke and Owen last week said that part of, the reason they got interested in politics was the election of Donald Trump. So they are, at least he's getting people interested. It's kind of, it's great that kids care about it, because if we're going to keep our republic, as Benjamin Franklin famously said, it's a republic if you can keep it. You've got to have an active citizenry that's knowledgeable, that's understands that we are a self-governing constitutional republic. We are not a straight democracy. We are not an authoritarian government where the government controls and runs it. It's a government, by the people, for the people, of the people. So really great that the two of them are very involved in social media. Owen's also a comedian. Luke has his own little YouTube channel called Elected News. So you can just look up Luke and Elected News. And I think Owen's going to get more involved as well.
Well, I think they're on the right path, because just this week I was actually at Binghamton University here in the Southern Tier of New York, and I was speaking at an event, and Owen and Luke, they're just like what we're seeing now in the college. There is a large group of people. Sadly, they're being oppressed. They're being suppressed in their voice, but they're out there. I had that audience. It was a couple dozen students, and it was amazing to see such an intense interest in our future for our nation. And it gives me hope.
Now, was this like an official event, or were you just speaking?
Yeah.
What was it? What was the event?
Well, it was me as a speaker at Binghamton University talking about the connection between the suppression of the Second Amendment, the vaping ban, and the trend, especially in the 2020 candidates like Andrew Yang in particular, and a couple of the others, on how the Democrats are just stripping away freedoms. The ban on vaping is a lack of due process in the same way that red flags are. And so I was talking about that. It was a good hour and a half.
So what are the kids saying about the vaping issue? Because that's a big issue. I know a lot of people who vape and are pretty upset about it. I guess it just bans the flavored ones that are marketed to younger people. Isn't that what the ban is?
Sort of. In New York State, we were the second ones to go forward and make the ban on any flavors of vaping. But we've seen in Michigan and a couple of other states are now moving towards banning of all vaping. Now, here's the big thing. A lot of people don't know this. Vaping's been around for 16 years. There are 10.8 million people who actually use vaping, and 60% of them do it because they're trying to quit smoking. So
Right.
It's not this big crisis that everyone's trying to make it out to be. What we found out, according to the CDC, just on, I believe it was Friday night, is that it's not the vaping that's the problem. It's these black market usage of adding THC and vitamin E, and in some cases even cyanide and pesticides, that's causing this problem of people who are being affected. That seems to be the key thing. 77% of all the cases have this in common. So what we saw is, looking backwards in time, so Governor Cuomo and a few other governors have gone out, denied people due process, didn't listen to the public or care. They stepped forward and said, I don't like this. Everyone loses their freedom, loses their choice. And we're going to impose through this full strength of the government our decision. And now it turns out that decision was wrong because it's illegal action that's causing people to have problems.
Okay, so the legislature hasn't gone back on this. This is an executive order from the president or the governor, but actually the president weighed in on it as well. So is there a way that you can craft the legislation to go after some of this, illegitimate groups or these, what do you call them? They're sort of knockoffs.
Black market.
Yeah, black
market. Yeah. Well, it's kind of like the same thing that you're looking at it is exactly the same situation as with guns. You're looking at a black market illegal use of a product. So you have to target those black market drug dealers in this case, just like you would look at criminals who are using guns violently. That's where we should be looking. We should be targeting laws that are going to make it harder for them and create harsher penalties and fines for doing this and endangering people's lives. Instead, the government, just like with guns, has turned around and said, hey, here's a great idea. We're going to punish people who are legally using a product the way it's meant to be used. Same thing with guns. We're punishing law-abiding citizens who are not literally 99.999% of the gun-owning population. Law-abiding citizens, never a problem. 1 out of 2 Americans. And yet we're making laws that are punishing them, not the criminals. This is the connection, and we see that consistently in all of the policy coming from the Democratic Socialists and the progressives.
Well, it's all about control. Let me ask you something. What was the students' reaction to? I'm sure that a lot of them were probably more involved in vaping than actually owning guns, and especially, the guns that are being described by people like Beto O'Rourke, which could be an AR-15 with a lot of plastic components on it that make it look very scary. What are the students' reaction to that? I would guess the students would probably be mostly opposed to, and more of a Beto, like followers of what Beto would have to say. Beto O'Rourke, we're talking about Michael O'Rourke, who is a former member of Congress and now a presidential candidate from Texas. Is he still on the debate stage? He is, right? He's still in it. One?
Beto?
Yeah.
He's still supposedly in there. Supposedly. But the kids they didn't care about Beto. And I don't know a lot of people who do. They're more interested in Yang, but in terms of
that's because Yang is proposing $1,000 a month, right? From the government.
Yeah, it's almost. If you actually look at his policy, it's not quite true.
Well, what is it? I'd be all in for the $1,000 a month. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, we wouldn't be able to get it. According to Yang's policy, the poor people wouldn't be able to get $1,000. You have to choose between the government aid you get now or his $1,000. And anyone who is middle class or above wouldn't get the $1,000. So there's a very small section of America who would get it, which works out to about $1.7 trillion that we don't have. And his answer is, well, I'll just print the money, which is inflation. And we've already seen what happens when you do that. It's called the Weimar Republic. History, obviously, is not one of his strong points. He's not very smart about this. For a guy who says he knows a lot about math, he seems to not be doing any math.
But really, this is all pandering anyway. They're just trying to say, we're going to give you everything we can, including the shirt off the guy next to you, the shirt off his back, and we're going to give you everything from everyone. And I think it's typical. I mean, I listen to all of them. Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, they jump right on the bandwagon. You've got them all jumping in on the impeachment issue down in Washington, all except, of course, our congressman who's terrified of the word impeachment. He just keeps saying inquiry. This is serious. It's a crisis, or, we can't be circling the wagons around the president. I'm paraphrasing, some of the things coming from Anthony Brindisi, but yet he's terrified of using the word impeachment because in a district that Trump won by 16 points, he certainly doesn't want to attack the president. He wants to try to ride the fence, but he also doesn't want to offend the resist movement and the progressive movement that's, clamoring for impeachment, and also who came into the district and, did a lot of work for him and helped him get elected by going door to door and doing a lot of his campaigning and calls and ground game. So, he has a lot at stake. He's got to try to see if he's lucky he has an adoring, absolutely obsequious press that ignores all this and just tries to promote him as some kind of moderate, when you and I know that his record is so left-wing. He's left of AOC. And even in the state assembly, I mean, this has been pointed out by a number of commentators. He was the single most liberal left-wing member based on your voting record, not what you say. What you do is how you vote. in New York City was tied with like some of these people who are self-proclaimed socialist Marxists in New York City. So when he tries to say he's moderate, that's really the press just, feathering the nest for him. So he looks palatable to a lot of Republicans. And they say, well, he's a moderate. He isn't on top on the impeachment. What do you say about all that? That's pandering, another kind of pandering and going on right here in our own community.
Well, starting from the top, let me say first, it's very telling that all the Democratic socialists, all the candidates right now, their biggest push is we're going to buy the votes cheap by giving people free stuff that isn't free. And I think that says a lot about what they actually can offer people. I think that back in October of 2018, I made the prediction on my website, mvass.com. People can check it out. In October, I told everyone who's going to be the candidates. It's going to be Elizabeth Warren and it's going to be Kamala Harris, not because they're good, but because they're women. And they want to use the approach of Trump is so evil, so mean to women. And that's what they're going to go with. Using the gender identity politics and the fact that Kamala, who's going to probably be vice president, is a woman of color, so they can call him a racist. Yeah, and they're going to call him a racist. So that's their approach, using gender and identity politics to obscure any facts. As for Mr. Brindisi, Anthony, who I've known for 7 years now, and on and off we've spoken, and I look at the best way to look at him is to look at his record, and I have to tell you, it's really poor. It's one of the worst I've seen. He, at this moment, is the most ineffective person I've seen in the New York 22nd. Going back, I can't name anyone who's been as ineffective as him except for Richard Hanna in his third term. And I say that because looking at his record, he averages 3 members of Congress following any bill that he has out there. Which is ridiculous because even Anthony Delgado gets 30 people per bill. That means that no one, including Democrats, care what Anthony is doing. And Anthony is trying to figure out a way to get attention and to try and preserve his reelection bid without having actually done anything. If the media was actually paying attention, they would be asking the question I've been asking since January. You're ineffective. When are you going to become effective? Can you become effective? Because if you can't, he's useless as a congressman. That's true no matter what party you're with. And that's his biggest problem. And I think that's an issue that we really have to address. If no one's listening to him and no one cares what he has to say, then why is he in there?
Well, look at this. The media, we had a very incredible 2 years when I was in the position. The media keeps saying I didn't get any bills passed. I have 5 bills that were original co-sponsor that were made into law, 5 presidential pens to prove it when you're at the bill signing. Not to mention all the other bills, the tax reform, the regulatory, a lot of the things that we did. Opioid, we addressed the opioid problem more than any other president, our defense installations, our community service block grants, our community development block grants, our historic tax credits. You could go on about the accomplishments we had in just those 2 years in the 115th Congress. But yet, Anthony Brindisi, seals an envelope and you would think he cured cancer. He really hasn't had anything significant, but the media just falls all over him like he's the second coming. And I'm biased and so are you. We're both Republicans, but obviously he defeated me last year by a very narrow margin. But I look and go, what have you really done? And what do you stand for? He hasn't. I fought to give us a lot of presence with the president of the United States. Like him or not, the president is a powerful person who can help our region. We need help. We need somebody on our team that understands New York, cares about the Rust Belt. And that was part of the appeal of President Trump to not just Republicans, and a lot of Republicans don't like him, but, the real populist, non-globalist people were like saying, we like it. We want someone to stand up for us for once. And I think that's what Trump does. I think Brindisi is he's just hiding. I think he doesn't have a national presence at all, which he says he doesn't want to have. But that gets you to the president. It gets you resources. It gets people to pay attention to you.
Well, I think it's a bigger issue because people won't always like to hide behind the thought, well, Mike, you're a partisan. You're a conservative Republican. Of course I am. I admit that openly. That's why I'm a commentator. But what's more important is, what am I commenting on? His record is nonpartisan, and his record is very clear. He put out a bill, which is actually a report for the VA to work on, to find out how many vets are affected by suicide. What are the leading causes? That's a very universal idea. That's not partisan. Anyone wants to help our veterans who have given their life and their blood for us. And with 45 members of Congress that are, I believe it's 45 members of Congress who are ex-military, he couldn't get them on. He got all of, if I remember the bill correctly, 7 members to actually back him. No, excuse me, it was 10. He couldn't get the veterans. Think about that. How ineffective are you when you can't go up to ex-military members and say, I want to help other ex-military members by trying to get to the root cause of the suicide problem? And it's a big problem.
It is a big problem. Let me say this to you, Mike. A lot of that was covered in the VA Mission Act and the bills that we passed in the 115th Congress already. So there was sort of a duplicative nature to that bill. I mean, it's a great bill. It's a great idea. Great to draw attention to it. But that bill didn't really, we're already doing a lot of those things that was in the bill. It was just sort of putting a little accent on that we need to focus on veteran suicide, which we do. It's a very serious issue. My son talks about it all the time. We only have a couple minutes left, but I do find that he is really not, he's just afraid of his own shadow in a lot of ways because he doesn't want to take a position. He's got the progressive in him. He is a progressive left winger based on voting record, both in his long record in the assembly and his record so far in Congress. He is left of AOC. Still, he did creep up to like a 10 on that Trump index, is like how often you vote with the president and support the president. And he got he's back down to a 9, and AOC is like a 12 or a 13. So I find it very interesting that, he's trying not to draw attention to himself because he wants to just slip in again. And, people don't know he had $15 million, which is just incredible, to run a campaign in upstate New York. Only exceeded by Antonio Delgado, who you referenced earlier, who had $20 million. I mean, $10 million in money coming from these big corporations that went through super